Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on. Here's mine. 2 years ago, I went out with a pilot from Bumble. When I got there, he said, I hope it didn't take you too long to get here. I said, no, 15 minutes. I walked. He said, good, because I don't date people who live more than a mile from me. He then asked the hostess for a table for two and said, you have to eat with me, even though he knew I had already eaten. He proceeds to force me to pick out an appetizer, an entree, and a dessert. We are there for 2 hours. I am barely eating because, again, I have already eaten, which he shames me for, and then asks me to split the bill. At that point, I wanted to get out of there, so I just did it. We're putting on our coats. It's February, by the way. He pulls on black leather gloves and says, these are my murder gloves. He then insists on walking me home, meaning he continues to walk next to me even though I continue to ask him not to. At one point, I tried to turn on a street that wasn't mine, and he said, we haven't walked 15 minutes yet. This isn't where you live. There's a doorman building next to my building, and I walked in with a big smile on my face and said, this man outside is stalking me. Please pretend I live here. And this has been today's episode of Things Women Do to Avoid a Confrontation That Might Lead to Murder. Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
So I met this guy on Grindr. His name was Ben, and he was like, oh, let's go on a date. And I was like, all right, sure, let's go on a date. And then he was like, let's go to In-N-Out. So I drive 30 minutes, a couple days later, drive 30 minutes to go to In-N-Out. I get there, and he was like, I'm not really hungry. And I was like, oh, I'm not really hungry either, even though I really was. So we get in his car, and usually I don't go into cars with strangers, and I really shouldn't have. But he drives me up this, like, really, really tall hill with, like, this nice view. But there was, like, nobody there. So I was like, ooh, I'm going to get murdered. So he was like, let's get out of the car. Like, let's go walk around. So we get out of the car, and the first thing he does is, like, push me up against his car and, like, very aggressively makes out with me. And I'm like, ugh. I tried making it obvious that it was, like, not my thing, and I was very uncomfortable. And so he kind of, like, got the hint. And he was like, let's get back in the car and, like, let's talk. So he starts talking to me about his fetish and shows me videos of him humping balloons. And then when I tell him I don't want to have sex with him, he kicks me out of his car.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
So I met this guy off Tinder, and when he got there, he was immediately very different looking from his photos, which I kind of let slide. You know, sometimes you can't take good photos for a while, but a decade is a bit of a stretch. He becomes slowly more racist, and also we were sitting at the front of a bar, like in the seating on the street. Homeless man walked past, asked us for change. A little bit later, the same homeless man walked past and asked us for change again, and he said, does he have nothing better to do? I'm like, nah, bro. That's his job. So I was like, fuck this guy, I want to go. So I was working at the bar upstairs. So I just said, I've been told to cover a shift, just thinking I could go hide there. He follows me up, and then I have to fake work for 2 hours.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
I met up with this guy at a bar that I went to a lot, and the night was winding down. He went inside, and then we said our goodbye. When I went inside, I discovered he had put all of his drinks on my tab.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
A couple years ago, I went on a date with a guy that lived in my building. We went out to dinner, and at dinner, he mentioned that he was a feminist. And I'm like, okay, no problem, whatever. And when the check came, of course, he said, could we split it? Now, that's a deal breaker for me now, but back then it definitely wasn't. So whatever, we split the bill and walked back to the apartment complex. I forgot to mention, on this date, I did mention that I went to Catholic school. We get back to my apartment, and the man has a fit when I won't sleep with him. This man, the feminist, has the audacity to tell me that the reason I don't want to sleep with him is because I went to Catholic school. Like, what? Excuse me?
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
So this was a few years ago. I was talking to this guy who lived probably like a 4 or 5 hour drive from where I lived. One day he messaged me and was like, hey, I'm down in Wellington. Do you want to do something? Should we go on a date? And of course I was like, yes, because I hadn't spent all this time talking to him for fun. He messages me and he's like, what do you want to do? And I'm like, well, I only get an hour break at course, so should we just go to McDonald's because it's nice and easy and it's right next door. It's now my lunch break and we go over to McDonald's. We get to the counter and turns out he's either forgot his wallet or he had no money. Where I'm just like, you know what, that's fine. I'll pay for it. I am not one of those women who thinks that the man has to pay for every fucking meal that you have together. I'm fine with paying. You can pay next time. We have our Maccas, everything's fine. It's time for me to go back to course. So I'm like, hey, I've got to go now. Message me later. This dude then asks me if he can borrow some gas money so he can get back to where he's come from. But at this point, I just want to get back to course. And I'm like, fine. And I gave him some gas money. Fun fact, I never got it back. And it looks like he just came down for a free feed at Maccas.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
So I matched with a girl on Tinder who was definitely out of my league, so I was very excited to go out with her. And we were sitting at the bar, and after like 2 or 3 drinks, she was just looked me dead in the eyes, and she was like, "I'm not enjoying myself." I'm like, "Oh my god, okay, let's leave. Like, I'm sorry, I didn't know." She's like, "No, no, no, I just need to get more drinks." And this is like not a cheap bar, so I was like, "Okay," and I got her like 3 or 4 more drinks because she kept wanting more. Ended up she getting violently drunk, like really drunk, and she threw up all over the bar, like on the bar itself. And the bartender's like, "Get your girlfriend out of here." Everybody in the bar is like, "What the fuck?" I'm like, I didn't want to explain that she's not my girlfriend. So I was like, "Let's go." And she's like, "Don't fucking touch me. Don't touch me. It was a bad date. I had a bad time."
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
Right, I've turned up to a date once and the girl immediately started laughing at my trousers. She's like, "Oh my god, why didn't you just wear denims?" We sat down at a table. She told me that I had dry skin and that at 5'8" I was too short, even though she knew this beforehand. She then took a newspaper from the next table, started reading it, like, "Tell me something interesting about you." I proceeded to tell her that I spent my teenage years in children's homes. And she said, "Oh my god, that is so depressing. You're so miserable." I said, "Look, I'm going to leave now." We stood outside. I went to phone a taxi. And she said, "Why don't you just phone one from my house in the morning?" Like, why do some people think, like, lowering your self-esteem is some sort of brilliant reverse psychology that's going to make you interested in them? I just went, "Look, you can shove that taxi right."
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
I was on a date with a guy who took the bread off of my plate, handed it back to the server, and then told me he deserved to date a guy with a 6-pack.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
Alright, so boom, me and this girl were both back in town over the break. So I text her on my way to the barbershop and be like, "Are you in town?" As soon as I get in the chair, she was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Bet." So my barber was like, "I'm gonna get you right, bro." And it was it. The man chopped me up so nice, bro. I thought I was gonna go and get married. My barber was like, "Bro, when you get in the car with her, turn that throat, baby." And she liked it, you know how the night gonna go. Jokes, of course. But I turned it on, she liked it. I was like, "Alright, bet." She already been talking grease to me anyways. I was like, shit. So boom, we eating, we talking, drinking, you know, little simple stuff. We ain't getting too fucked up and nothing like that. Alright, so we get back in the car, trying to make some words into the actions, and then like she was just playing, I'm being all childish and shit. I'm like, "Alright, bet." So I'm trying to get a kiss, and she kept saying that like an X on my lip. I'm like, "Bro, he's playing too much." They just talking about she got good coochie and she don't want to give me a hook like the other dudes. I'm like, "Bro, I promise you I won't be at all." So at this point, the mood is dead, and so I'm like, "I'm gonna take you home." So we're taking her home, I'm chilling and everything. She kissed me on my cheek and on my neck and every red light, and I'm sitting here like, "Bruh, your time is up. You still going home." Now my horny ass did try again when we got to her crib. She has not heard from me since then. It wasn't bad because I didn't hit. It was bad because she being childish and arrogant, and I don't fuck with that.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
So one time I met this girl on Tinder and she was looking really hot. So we ended up going for the first date. It was a dinner date and she was acting really weird but nice. She offered to pay for all my food and she kept buying me drinks and drinks. And even when I said no more drinks, she just insisted I have more drinks until I pretended I was drunk. To cut the long story short, I ended up in this girl's hotel room and she seemed very, very keen on doing the nasty with me. But she had to go to the loo. So while she was in the loo, a text message came into her phone and I picked it up. It was in a different language, I believe Russian. So I went on Google Translate, pasted, copied the text, pasted it. And the text message said, "Hold him down. We'll be there in 10 minutes. The way my heart started beating so fast. The way I ran that day, I don't know.
First date.
Oh, I meet this guy on Tinder, 6'8", fine, caramel, absolutely gorgeous. And we go on a couple of lunch dates. It's cute. My coworkers get to know him. He even comes to a work event. He supposedly works nights, but this particular weekend, he wants to cook for me. So I'm super excited. I grab my favorite bottle of wine and an overnight bag, and I head over. No sooner do I put the microwaved Alfredo to my lips, there's a knock at the door. I'm like, "Are you expecting someone?" He's like, "No." He begins collecting my things and tossing them out the back door and then tells me to hide. As I'm collecting my things and going over how my life has reached this new low, MacBook in the dirt low. I walk down the grassy knoll to my car, and a woman and 3 children come running out the back door to let me know that he is married. He changed the locks on them, and this isn't the first time.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
When I was 17, I worked at Hollister, and one day this guy walked in and he said he's an aspiring Hollister model and then asked me out on a date. So we went to Dairy Queen and I got a smoothie, and he wouldn't let me drink the smoothie. So every time I picked it up, he'd like physically take it out of my hand and say, "You're not listening while I talk to you if you're drinking that." All he did was talk about himself, show me his shirtless modeling shots, and then eventually he went into his life story. He told me he literally just got out of rehab 2 days ago, was looking to find a nice, smart girl like me, even though I never said anything, to get him back on the right track. I freaked out. I'm 17, he's like 16, so I called my friends to get me out of there. As soon as I leave, he texts me that he loves me. He's gonna tell his mom about me. He's gonna tell all his friends about me, his photographer about me. I freaked out. I blocked him. He kept FaceTiming me from different numbers, so eventually I picked up to get him to stop. And on the FaceTime, he called me several racial slurs, made fun of my friend's last name. He said he only liked me for the color of my skin, said if I didn't sleep with him within 8 months, he would just go for it. And now he's signed to a major modeling agency, has fan accounts, and he does music videos. So yeah.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
Do I have a story for you? Okay, a few years ago, I go on this Tinder date with this guy. I don't remember his name, but we're gonna call him Michael. Okay, I go on this date. It goes really well. He's really sweet. We get along great. He kisses me goodnight, and he invites me to hang out with his friends that weekend. Okay, I show up at the bar that weekend. I meet his 2 friends, a guy and a girl. They're both very nice. We're chatting, getting to know each other. The guy is like hitting on me, and I was like, "I'm like with your friend Michael, like what?" And then Michael's kind of like only talking to her, and I'm like, "Hello." We go to another bar at one point. When we're walking across the street, he like puts his arm around her, and I was like, "Oh, what is happening?" So we get into the bar. He goes to buy each of us a drink. I turned to her and I was like, "I have to ask you, are you and Michael like together?" And she goes, "Yeah, we've been dating for a few months. Why?"
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on. Here's mine.
So I had this really big dude ask me out on a date. And before y'all say anything, I'm a big girl myself, but this guy was probably pushing 500 pounds. But I gave him a chance, because I'm not judgmental. So he took me to CC's Pizza. We walk in, everybody knows him by name. They're high-fiving him and shit. We sit down. This motherfucker ate 8 plates of pizza before they brought him his usual, which was 2 more pizzas, which he proceeded to fold double, and then he wrapped them up in a napkin and he put them down his pants and he was putting them in his pocket. He said he was taking pizza home to his grandma who didn't have money for groceries. We went back to his house and his grandma was outside, and I said, "Hey, he's got your food." She said, "Honey, his parents have had to refinance their house to feed his big ass. You need to run like hell now." Needless to say, that was the first and the last date. Worst date ever.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been.
Gosh, there was so many terrible ones. How do you choose the absolute worst? Well, this was a low light. Okay, so it's years ago. I'm online dating here in LA. I meet with a guy at a bar that he chose that was close to him. Far drive for me. What a gentleman. A few minutes in, I said, "Hey, on your profile, you said you've been to Thailand. That's cool. I've always wanted to go." And he was like, "It's a bit of a different trip for a man to go to Thailand than a woman." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" And he was like, "Do you really want to know?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess." And he was like, "You can get really good hand jobs there for $15. So I made a face, and then he said, "Don't make that face. They're well taken care of." Well taken care of. Then he asked if I would give him a hand job. I said no. He got the check. We'd only had 1 sip out of our drinks. When we got to the door, he asked if I would give him a ride to his car, which was a block and a half away. And that was the end of that. Years later, I told this story on a talk show. He found one of my fan pages on Facebook and sent it a message saying, "Hey, heard you tell that story. Nice that you exaggerated the truth. Ha ha, whatever. Anyway, I wrote a web series. Would you mind watching it and giving me some notes?" That, ladies and gentlemen, is dating in LA.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been.
So at this point, I'm living in a weird-ass apartment. It's like a bunk bed and a kitchen of a studio that I share with another person. And this guy really wants to come over. I tell him a million times that my place sucks for having people over, suggest other things to do. None of my ideas are cutting it. So he pulls up, walks in the door, turns to me, deadpan, says, "Dude, this apartment sucks. Why would you bring someone here on a date?" Then he looks down at my pants, which are very conventional skinny jeans, and he's like, "Those are a really weird choice of pants to wear tonight." Then he stays like poking around my apartment, finds my skateboard in a corner, and it's like, "If I were you, I wouldn't have this on display. There's not a lot of scratches, and you look like a poser." I'm like, "I live in a kitchen. Everything is on display." So we go and sit on my futon, like 2 inches from our refrigerator. Awkward silence. He leans in, kisses me, pulls back abruptly, and goes, I kind of have a deal breaker foot fetish. You should know. And I look down at my feet, which are...
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
So, like 5 or 6 years ago, I went on a date with a guy. And he picked me up. He was 20 minutes late. We were supposed to go to sushi. But once he picked me up, he was like, where can we watch the game? And I was like, what game? And he's like, basketball's on. I really want to watch basketball. And I was like, okay, let's go to World of Beer. So we go to World of Beer. We sit down. He's like, I already ate, so order whatever you want. And he also told me he's not really a drinker. And then as I order my flatbread and 1 drink, he orders 2 vodka Red Bulls, 2 double pickle shots, whatever they're called, and proceeds to get hammered. So then he's like, oh, let's go to this other bar. Now, this other bar was closer to my house, so I was like, let's do that because I'll be closer. And we get there. He gets plastered drunk, watching the game, not paying attention to me whatsoever. And I was like, hey, I think I'm going to go home. And he stops and looks at me and goes, you're really going to let me pay for all your food and drinks and not take me home with you? Like for part 2.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on. Here's mine. 2 years ago, I went out with a pilot from Bumble.
I took a girl out to the bar, had some drinks, and she started getting pretty sloshed. She wanted to come back to my place, so I said, all right. And we go back to my place, and she kept drinking. And then she got very drunk and said she wanted to do the nasty. And I was thinking, she's too drunk. Plus, I don't need to catch a case, have her say I took advantage or nothing. So I said, maybe next time, let me take you home. So I took her home. And I go back to my house, I go to sleep, I wake up, and in the morning I find out that she killed herself. So I get to deal with that for the rest of my life.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on.
Okay, so one of my mutual friends that is not my friend no more because of this situation, I told her to hit me up with one of her friends at school because I thought he was cute, So, of course, I made my friend show him pictures of me because I'm a plus size girl. And I know for a fact some guys do not like bigger girls. And he was one of them. So we talked for a couple of days and decided to meet up at beat-ups. And he was kind of cute, So I was like, damn. In my head, I was like getting butterflies and stuff. But when he looked at me, he had that look. That, damn, this bitch is big. Like, big, fat look. And, like, that shit just made me insecure throughout the whole date. Okay, so we're waiting for our food. And we're just sitting there in awkward silence. So I try to start small conversation, small talk. But he does not want to talk to me at all. Part 2.
Tell me about the worst date you've ever been on. Here's mine.
He had a micro eggplant. This guy and I had been dating for a month. We had been on numerous dates. He was the shit. Not gonna lie, he treated me like a queen, but he never would make a move. Like, he would kiss me, but never would make a move. So one night I was like, I'm gonna make the move. Oh, and I made the move after he took me on a date one night and I was at his house. He gets up, he turns out the lights, and then when we get to touchy-feely, I noticed something. It was very, very tiny. In my brain, I'm like, oh, maybe it's gonna grow. It never grew. It was maybe 1.5 inches. I don't say anything though. I keep going trying to do what I was going to do in the first place. But we ended up not being able to be intimate because I didn't have a condom that would fit him. So we ended up just going to bed. The next morning he makes me breakfast. I go home. I start researching micro eggplant. I was still down to date him, but here's the kicker. I went to text him that day, ask him how his day was going, and he had blocked me. And I never heard from him again. Like, sir, I researched micro eggplants for you.